On November 11th, 2019, at 12:22 in the afternoon, a wall in the south of England collapsed. 600 tons of stone, a section of the Lewes Castle curtain wall, nearly 900 years old, fell onto a neighbouring house in 12 seconds. By sheer luck, no one died. But here is what stopped the structural engineers cold. The other walls of Lewes Castle, built in the same century by the same masons with the same stone, were still standing. You have a retaining wall in your backyard. 7 years old, already bowing. Your brick chimney started shedding mortar after 4 winters. Your driveway is spalling. Your foundation has hairline cracks, the inspector said were normal. We build structures that barely survive a mortgage. They built structures we are still arguing about 1,000 years later. So why did one wall at Lewes fall, and the others did not? It is not the stone. It is not the size. It is not the age. The difference is hidden inside the wall, in the core, in the place no one ever looks. And what the construction industry quietly stopped doing in the 1800s is the reason a wall built in 1130 can outlast a wall built in 1970. Today, we open the wall. The wall that fell for 2 days before the collapse. England had been hammered by a winter storm. The ground around Lewes Castle was saturated. Rain had been driving sideways into the curtain wall for 48 straight hours. 17. East Sussex County Council had done structural strengthening work on it. They had used modern engineering, modern materials, modern bonding agents. 2 years later, it collapsed anyway. When the structural engineers from Historic England and Cheesmer Heritage Conservation arrived, the inspection turned into something closer to an autopsy. They were not there to figure out what had broken. They were there to answer a second question, the one that haunts every heritage engineer in Britain. Why did this section fall when Carnarvon Castle in Wales, completed in 1283, is still intact, when the Great Keep at Hedingham, built in 1140, is standing without a crack, when the walled city of Carcassonne in France looks like it could survive another 1,000 years? The fall pattern at Lewes told the story. The wall had not snapped at the base. It had not fractured along a single weakness. The 2 outer faces of the wall, the dressed stone you see from outside, the part that looks like a wall, had separated from each other. The stones on the front and the stones on the back had pulled apart along the middle, like 2 pages of a book opening up, and in between, where there should have been solid, mortared, packed material, there was a void, a cavity full of loose, crystallized fragments that had once been a structural core and were no longer. The engineers have a term for this in modern reports. They call it leaf separation, or face separation, or in the older terminology used by stonemasons for at least 800 years, they say the wall delaminated, like an onion losing its layers. And here is the part that should disturb anyone who lives in or near a building older than 50 years. The same delamination is happening right now in millions of walls around the world. Most of the people who live behind those walls have no idea. The engineers who survey them do. 3 leaves, 1 body. To understand why one wall fell and the others stood, you have to understand what a medieval wall actually is. It is not 1 wall, it is 3. Walk up to the curtain wall at Carnarvon Castle in Wales, completed in 1283. Run your hand along it. What you are touching is the outer leaf, the dressed face, the part the architect wanted you to see. Now imagine cutting straight through the wall, maybe 2.5 meters thick. On the inside of the castle, you would find another face, another layer of dressed or roughly squared stone. That is the inner leaf. In between those 2 leaves, packed solid for the entire 2.5 meters, is something else entirely. Irregular field stones, smaller broken pieces, aggregate, brick fragments, crushed ceramic, all of it bound together by lime mortar, mixed with whatever local pozzolanic material the masons could find. This is the core. This is the rubble core. This is the part of the wall that does the actual work. The masons did not invent this technique. They inherited it. Vitruvius, the Roman architect writing in 25 BC, devoted an entire chapter of his book on architecture to it. The Greeks had a name for it, emplekton, which translates roughly to interwoven masonry. The Romans called the engineered version opus emplekton. By the time medieval cathedral builders picked it up in the 12th century, the technique was already over 1,000 years old. Vitruvius wrote something else worth knowing. He warned future builders that Roman masons had been cutting corners on the technique already in his own time. The Greeks, he noted, would lay every stone of the wall as a complete block, including the core. The Romans, in a hurry to expand, dumped rubble and mortar into the cavity instead. He predicted, in writing, that the cheaper Roman version would fail centuries before the Greek original. The Greek walls did outlast the Roman ones. But the medieval masons who came after refined the rubble core to a level Vitruvius could not have imagined. The reason for 3 layers was not aesthetic. It was not because masons did not know how to build a solid wall. They built 3 layers because the engineering of carrying enormous vertical loads and absorbing horizontal impacts demanded it. The outer leaf takes the weather. It is sacrificial. When ice and rain and wind work on the outside of the castle, they work on those dressed stones first. The leaf erodes slowly. It can be repaired. It can be replaced. The inner leaf takes the tension from the inside. It holds the floors and the vaults and the roofs. It carries the load of every wooden beam, every flagstone above it. And the rubble core, in the middle, distributes weight from both leaves into the foundation and acts as a shock absorber for everything that hits the wall from outside. When a trebuchet round struck a curtain wall, 100-kilogram stone moving at terminal velocity, the energy did not stop at the outer face. The face cracked, sometimes shattered, but the energy travelled into the rubble core, where loose, irregular stones could rearrange themselves a fraction of a millimetre without breaking. The wall flexed, the wall absorbed, the wall did not fall. A solid stone wall of the same thickness, hit by the same trebuchet round, had nowhere to send the energy except through itself. The whole wall would crack from face to face. One projectile, a single failure point. This is why every serious medieval fortification used 3 layers. Not because the masons were lazy, because 3 layers survived siege engines that 2 solid stone walls could not. But Lewes Castle had a rubble core. Caernarfon has a rubble core. Hedingham has a rubble core. Why did one fall and the others stand? The stitch. Here is the part the construction industry stopped teaching. 3 layers is not the answer. 3 layers is the starting point. The actual difference between a wall that lasts 100 years and a wall that lasts 1,000 comes down to 3 engineering details that you cannot see from the outside, that have no modern equivalent in mass-produced construction, and that a single skilled mason knew by feel. The first is the diatone. In Italian, diatono. In English, the throughstone, or the bonda. It is a single block of stone that is long enough to pass through the entire thickness of the wall, from the outer face all the way to the inner face. At regular intervals, the mason would set one of these in place of a normal facing stone. To the outside observer, it looks the same as any other block. From inside the wall, it stitches the 2 leaves to the core. Without diatones, the 2 faces of the wall work independently. The outer face takes wind load on its own. The inner face takes vertical load on its own. The rubble core sits between them, doing its job. But the system is not unified. Add lateral force, wind, settlement, earthquake, and the leaves move at different rates. Eventually, they peel apart. A research team at the Politecnico di Milano tested multi-leaf masonry walls under axial compression. They built scaled 3-leaf wallets, some with throughstones, some without. The walls with diatones, properly distributed, carried roughly 9 to 13% more load before failure than the walls without. More importantly, they failed differently. The walls without throughstones failed by leaf separation. The 2 faces parted ways, and the core spilled. The walls with throughstones failed in compression, all 3 layers crushing together as a single body, the way concrete crushes. That 9 to 13% number sounds small. It is not. Over 800 years of cyclic loading, temperature changes, freeze-thaw, settlement, wind, that 9% compounds. It is the difference between a wall that fails at year 300 and a wall that survives to year 1000. The second detail is the mortar. In 2018, a research team at Vilnius Gediminas Technical University drilled core samples into the medieval retaining wall of Gediminas Castle Hill in Lithuania. The wall dates to the late 13th century. They drilled boreholes 9 meters deep, pulling intact samples of the original mortar from depths where centuries of weather could not have reached. The compressive strength of the mortar at the deepest layers was 8.5 megapascals. In some samples, 10. That is the strength of low-grade modern concrete, in a binder that was made from limestone burned in a wood-fired kiln 700 years ago. The recipe was hydraulic lime, quartz sand and crushed brick crumbs in a ratio of 1 part lime to 2.3 parts sand. The crushed ceramic was the key. Fired clay contains silica and alumina, which react with the lime in the presence of water to form calcium silicate hydrates and calcium aluminosilicate hydrates. These are the same compounds that make modern Portland cement strong. The mason did not know the chemistry. He knew that mortar made with brick dust set harder, set faster, and held up better in the rain than mortar made with sand alone. The Alhambra Palace in Granada was built around the same period. When researchers tested its mortars, they found compressive strengths between 11 and 15 megapascals, higher than poured concrete in many residential foundations today. For comparison, pure air lime mortar, made from non-hydraulic lime with sand alone, struggles to reach 3 megapascals. Most ancient mortars without pozzolanic additives test between half a megapascal and 3. The medieval mason was not making weak mortar that survived by accident. He was making concrete-grade binder with a recipe that predates Roman cement by 1,000 years. The third detail is patience. A medieval mason did not build more than a metre or 1.5 meters of wall in a single day. Then he stopped. He waited. He let the lime mortar carbonate, let it pull carbon dioxide from the air and recrystallize into solid calcium carbonate before adding more weight on top. If you build too fast, the lower courses compress before they cure. The mortar squeezes out, the wall settles unevenly, the rubble core pockets up and creates voids. This is the part you cannot replicate with money. You cannot speed up carbonation. You cannot rush a chemical reaction with the atmosphere. And here is where the construction industry decided, in the 1700s and 1800s, that it could not afford to keep doing this. Across Georgian and Victorian England, builders started using a deceptive bond pattern called the snap header. From the outside, the wall looked like Flemish bond, a beautiful traditional pattern of alternating long and short bricks, the short ones appearing to be diatones reaching into the core. They were not. They were half bricks, cut on a saw, glued onto the face. The inner leaf behind them was made of cheaper, softer brick, with no actual bond to the outside. The wall looked structural. It was not. It was a face glued to a body, with nothing stitching the two together. The United Kingdom has millions of Georgian and Victorian buildings with snap header construction. The people who live in them do not know. The engineers who inspect them do. Rigid dies, flexible lives. There is one more thing the masons understood that modern construction has gotten exactly backwards. Lime mortar is softer than the stones it binds. Portland cement is harder than most stones used in walls. Most people think harder is better. In a wall, harder is what kills the wall. Here is why. Every wall, no matter how solid it looks, is moving. It expands and contracts with temperature. It settles into the foundation. It absorbs vibration from traffic, from wind, from people walking. The stone wants to move. It is going to move. In a wall built with lime mortar, when movement happens, the mortar is the weakest element. It cracks first. The stones do not. The hairline cracks and the mortar absorb the displacement, and then something happens that sounds like medieval magic, but is actually basic chemistry. The lime in the mortar reacts with carbon dioxide and water vapor, slowly recrystallizing across the crack. The mortar self-heals. The wall stays whole. Researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 2023 finally proved the mechanism in Roman concrete samples. Small white chunks scattered through the matrix, called lime clasts, had been dismissed for over a century by archaeologists as evidence of sloppy mixing. They were not sloppy, they were a feature. When water enters a crack, it dissolves the nearest lime clast, releasing reactive calcium that travels into the fracture and crystallizes back into solid calcium carbonate. The wall heals itself every time it rains. The technique medieval masons inherited from Rome was doing the same thing in every building for the entire life of the structure. In a wall built with Portland cement, the mortar is harder than the stone. When movement happens, the cement does not crack. The stones crack, and once a stone cracks, it stays cracked. Portland cement does not self-heal, it just accumulates damage. There is a second problem with Portland cement in old walls. It is impermeable. It seals water inside the wall. In a lime mortar wall, water vapor moves freely through the joints. The wall breathes. Damp rises in winter, evaporates in summer. The wall stays balanced. In a Portland repaired wall, the water gets in through the stone, hits the cement layer behind it, and cannot leave. It freezes. It expands. The stone explodes from the inside. Historic England, the official heritage body of the United Kingdom, has banned the use of Portland cement on listed historic buildings for over 30 years. The damage that 30 or 40 years of Portland repair has done to medieval and Georgian buildings, in some cases, exceeds the damage of the previous 5 centuries of weather. A wall that survived the Black Death, the English Civil War, 2 World Wars, and the Industrial Revolution, destroyed in a generation by a bag of cement from the hardware store. Build one today. This is not a museum technique. The materials are still in the ground. The skill is still teachable, and the principle scales perfectly down to a garden wall, a retaining wall, or the foundation under your back porch. If you are building a stone or block retaining wall in your yard, here is the recipe. For the mortar, you want natural hydraulic lime, classified NHL 3.5 for an exposed garden wall, or NHL 5 for a load-bearing structural wall. Avoid NHL 2 for anything outdoors. The base ratio is 1 part lime to 3 parts sharp, well-graded sand by volume. If you want extra durability for a wall that takes weather on both faces, drop the ratio to 1 to 2.5. To make it medieval grade, add 10 to 15% of finely crushed fired brick dust by volume of the lime. The brick dust is the pozzolan. It is what turned ordinary lime mortar into something close to concrete in the Vilnius wall and the Alhambra. Mix 2/3 of your water and half of the sand into the mixer. Then add all the lime. Then let it disperse for 15 minutes before adding the remaining sand. Keep the mortar stiff, not wet. You only have about 2 hours of working time, so mix small batches. For the wall itself, build 2 faces of dressed stone or block. Between them, packed full, every void filled, a core of broken stone, gravel and brick fragments, all bound with the lime mortar. Every 4th or 5th course, set a single longer stone that passes all the way through. That is your through stone. That is your diatone. It bonds the 2 faces to the core. Lay no more than a metre of wall in a day. Wait 24 hours. Let the mortar carbonate. Move on. Never work below 5 degrees Celsius. Never work in direct sun without dampening the stones. And never use Portland cement to repoint a lime mortar wall. The materials cost almost nothing. A bag of hydraulic lime is sold in any masonry supply yard. Sand is sand. The rubble for the core can be collected from your own property. Cleared brush stones, broken concrete from the old patio, ceramic tile fragments from a renovation, the mason's trowel, the wooden float, and the small plastic hawk you need cost less than a single power tool. If you live in an older house, anything pre-1900, the highest return repair you can do is replacing any cement-based pointing with lime mortar. The mortar joint is the lung of the wall. Sealing it kills the wall. Opening it back up extends the life of the structure by decades. Run the math. A typical concrete block retaining wall in the United States, built by a contractor, runs $40 to $70 per square foot and lasts 30 to 50 years before significant repair. A traditional rubble core wall built with collected stone and a bag of hydraulic lime costs almost nothing in materials, and the wall is permanent. On your own time, in your own yard, the medieval option is also the cheaper one. And if you ever buy a Georgian or Victorian property, find an inspector who will check for snap header construction first. A bore scope between 2 bricks tells you in 5 minutes whether the wall is structural or decorative. Test the mortar joints with a soft probe. If the mortar is harder than the brick, the wall has been repointed with Portland cement and is on a clock. If the bricks behind the face are softer than the face bricks, you are looking at a snap header build with the leaves working independently. Neither is a deal breaker. Both are negotiating points. The witnesses still stand. Lewis fell. But the walls of Hedingham, the walls of Conwy, the walls of Carcassonne, the towers of Caernarfon, the keep of Bodiam, the curtain of cracked de Chevaliers in Syria, all of them are still standing. Each one is a witness. Each one is evidence. The difference between the wall that falls in 800 years and the wall that falls in 20 is not the stone. It is 3 invisible systems working together, through stones that stitch the leaves to the core, hydraulic lime mortar that carbonates into something stronger than poured concrete, plus the patience to let each course of stone carbonate before laying the next. Masons knew this. Engineers know this. The construction industry chose to forget, because a wall that lasts 1,000 years is a wall that nobody has to hire someone to rebuild. The knowledge is still here. The lime is in any masonry yard. The stones are in the ground beneath your feet. The skill is in books that are still in print and in courses you can take in a single weekend. It was not lost, it was switched off. If the Rubble core surprised you, watch this next. 2,000 years before medieval masons stitched stone walls together with lime and patience, Roman engineers were pouring something underwater that should not have worked at all. Concrete piers in salt water, harbours built below the tide line, structures that got harder the longer they stayed wet. Modern concrete dies in 50 years on dry land. Roman concrete is still standing in the ocean after 20 centuries. The reason is one ingredient that modern engineers spent 100 years dismissing as a flaw. Until next time, build to last.